Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, where our job is to help you build visibility, professional credibility, and connection with your ideal client by putting the human at the center of innovative marketing, so you can build and strengthen an engaging, enduring relationship with your ideal clients. I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm honored that you're here with me. If you haven't joined our wonderful marketing transformation community yet, go to innovabiz.co and collect your free gift as well. Do subscribe to the show and also leave a review because it helps others find us. Let's get into today's masterclass on this InnovaBuzz podcast.
I'm not really sure how or why it all started, where marketing has been something that's done to customers as opposed to conversation that's done with people. But it's really figuring out what people are looking for in terms of your solution. What are the conversations that they're already having in their head, and how you can join that conversation and become part of that dialogue and move them towards the solution that's with you. And not in a, manipulative way, but in a genuine way that's done with value and service.
Welcome back. I hope you've had an awesome week so far. If you haven't yet listened to my recent conversations with Alex Osterwalder, creator of the Business Model Canvas, and with Andrew Barnes of the 4-Day Week, then go check them out after you've listened to today's conversation. I'm really excited to have on the InnovaBuzz podcast as my guest today, Mariana Norton. She's a marketing strategist and a business consultant who helps business owners and entrepreneurs leave overwhelm in the dust with marketing strategies that attract the best clients, increase sales, and keep customers coming back for more. Her superpower is distilling a high-level overview of the opportunities into tangible actions. She uses humor and analogy bombs, as she calls them, to make even the most complex digital concepts digestible and actionable. In our discussion today, Mariana talked to me about success being a journey, not a destination. And you can be successful. You don't arrive at success. She explained that marketing is having a conversation with people along different parts of the customer journey and building relationships. And she told me how we all have minimum system requirements to function. Without further ado, then let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from Mariana Norton. Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast today from Alberta in Canada, Mariana Norton, who's a marketing strategist and a business consultant. Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, Mariana. It's a real privilege to have you as my guest.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Iman Zabi, who was our guest on episode 269 of the InnovaBuzz podcast, suggested that we talk with you, Mariana. So a big hello to Iman.
Yeah, a huge hello to her. She's an amazing human and copywriter.
And we had a lot of fun talking copywriting with her too.
Yeah.
Now, you're passionate about helping entrepreneurs and business owners make sense of marketing so that they can make more money. And I really like the way you express that so succinctly. But before we start talking about all things marketing and business strategy and business growth, tell us a bit about your background. Give us a kind of a whistle-stop tour of how you got to where you are today.
Whistle-stop tour. Well, I've been in digital since dinosaurs used to hand code websites. My first job in the digital space was actually support for dial-up when dial-up first came on
Oh, yeah.
online, so to speak. And then from that space, I started to see the opportunities that existed for businesses in the digital space. So one of the first opportunities that I came across was a traditional publishing company. So before we had our online ads the way we do now, it used to be a print publication that would come out locally that people would go and search. And I was working for them, basically helping them sell websites and build websites for their customers, and saw an opportunity for them and said, hey, like there's an opportunity here where nobody else is in the market space, even the big players, where you could be taking your ads, putting them online, they would be searchable, people could place their ads online. Like, it's a gigantic opportunity. And they essentially said, do you think you could do it? I'm like, well, I don't know, give me a budget and I'll go buy a couple of books. So I did, and I taught myself programming, built a database, built the front end, back end, everything, to the point that it was successful. And one of the largest companies in Canada bought them out because they had a functioning solution before anybody else, which got me
Mm.
hooked on the opportunities that existed in the digital space for businesses. And it still exists, but now what I found is it's actually become so much more complicated because there's so many options, so many voices, so many pieces, which is where I've come around to the whole, we really need to make sense about, what are the right pieces for your business as opposed to trying to do all the things. It used to be there was one thing you could do, essentially create a website. And now even
Yeah.
that is so convoluted.
Mm. Yeah, and I guess one of the things you mentioned about marketing being complex now with all the different options that people can have, one of the things that I find frustrating is that people, on the one hand, they get attracted to the latest shiny object and then think, oh, that's got to be integrated in here, and forget about what the strategy is. But at the same time, they're also abdicating a lot of the relationship building stuff to the technology. And I think, the more technology we add on, which they often add on without sort of consideration of the strategic aspects, but then they also say the more technology we add on, the less we have to actually work on our relationships. And I think the fundamentals are getting lost somewhere. How do you feel about that?
I absolutely agree. I actually have a talk that I've done a number of times where I have this term that I use for it called digital Mod Podge, where there's like that crafting that kids can do where you slap the glue on and you just keep like slapping things on. And even for really large companies, this is essentially what I've seen happening is they were like, oh, we need a website, and they get the website, and then they slapped on social media, and they, slapped on this or that, like you said, the newest and the greatest, without ever looking at, like, what are we actually trying to accomplish? How is this piece that we're slapping on going to actually align with our business goals and the people we're trying to talk to? So it becomes just this big sticky mess a lot of the times that nobody's taking the time to tease apart, like, what does each piece do? Why are we doing it? And like you said, there's always a latest and greatest and shiny and new automation tactic without taking the time to think about, like, does this serve our business and does this serve our client? Are we creating a great experience for them by adding this, or are we potentially taking away from the experience they've become accustomed to or that we could create?
Yeah, which is a great question to ask. I really like that one, and I know you're very fond of considering the customer journey as an essential part of the whole strategy. Now, your business is the Purposeful Entrepreneur, or one of your businesses is the Purposeful Entrepreneur, and you talk about success on purpose. So that speaks to that. I think there's a really good segue going into that. So tell us what you do there and why you do it.
Yeah, well, that has come essentially from the digital Mod Podge over the last, 20 years, but acutely in the last 3 to 5 years. I've had a lot of people come to me for digital strategies, like a growth strategy, looking at everything they're doing and how they can align it for business growth. And I've had a number of clients that once we've dug in and started teasing everything apart, they've realized that they've spent huge amounts of money, time, and energy on tactics that had zero results, right? So it's for new entrepreneurs and new people who are coming into the space, like we were talking about earlier, there's just so many options. There's so many voices in the room. There's, the comma clubs and, how many figures are you or should you be? And chasing that opposed to, what is your area of expertise? What are you trying to create? Who are you creating it for? And then figuring out what that path is and creating that success on purpose in a very intentional, purposeful way, both how we show up as business owners, but also translating that into how we're showing up in the market space with our marketing, messaging, and all those other pieces.
Yeah. And so success on purpose. So I know you talk about this a little bit. What is success? Because you mentioned 6 figures, 7 figures, however many figures you have to be successful, and you see this. I think back to the early days of internet marketing when the typical landing page would have some, typically guys. This was a very macho thing. A guy standing in front of either $1 million yacht or $1 million sports car with a bikini-clad girl on the front and saying, I've made it, and so listen to me.
Yeah.
So, what's your definition of success? I hope we've come a long way past that
I know. I
now,
was
by
going to
the way.
say,
But
how's that defining success for the woman laying across the Lamborghini? Not
yeah,
very
yeah.
very flattering. Well, it's funny that
And I always looked at it and thought, well, it's probably just a photo shoot anyway. They're probably doing a photo shoot advertising the yacht or the Lamborghini, and the guy's just photo bombed it or something.
Well, yeah, and that still exists. And that's something entirely different. That's, perceived success. That,
Mm,
we see this in our personal lives and in our business lives where people will spend a ton of effort and money in trying to create this perception of something, right? Of anything from, looking like you have a lot of money, or there's even people who do it in a spiritual sense, right? Like they'll buy the spiritual clothes and wear the crystals because they're trying to, embody a certain way of being. And it's funny that you've asked this question because I'm actually writing a new article for the Purposeful Entrepreneur today about success, like right now. So I've actually have kind of started to distill it down to there being a sweet spot, like a success sweet spot that each of us have, and that it's actually an intersection of self, life, and business. You could probably attest to this, and I think most people who followed a lot of very successful people will tell you that generally there seems to be this path of, hustling and grinding and putting business in front of everything else in order to get whatever it is, the car, the figures, or whatever, and finding out that at the end they haven't taken care of themselves, which leads to burnout. Which, how
mm,
is that successful?
yeah,
Or they've bankrupted their lives, right? Where they put grinding and hustling ahead of, being present for their children or with their spouses, their partners, their dogs, whatever is important to them in their life, their community, their church, which is backwards when we can start from a place of purpose of, what does success in your business look like? Who is it you're helping? How are you helping them? And of course, finances factor in because if we're not financially viable, it's a very expensive hobby. It's not a business. So, like
mm,
that to me is a given in business. But the self and the life part have traditionally been put last. Like for a lot of people, like I'm at 45, for me, I saw my dad having a successful business and that equaling not being present at home, right? Not taking care of himself, that he was providing and creating and building a business and that it came at a cost. And I think that if we can shift that view of success to be more holistic, then right from the beginning, we can create space to say, what is success for me? It's, being there for my kids, being there for my wife, taking care of myself, and innovating, creating, growing a business.
mm.
That was long.
It was, but I think it's a really important message. I mean, there's a lot of, as we're recording this, we're right in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, hopefully we're past the middle. Um,
I say
God
it's
forbid.
fluid. We just need to
Yeah,
flow
yeah,
with it. We're
that's
somewhere.
right. Yeah, but I think there's a lot of people now starting to talk about looking after yourself, and of course people in lockdown find it very frustrating, and that impacts on mental well-being. So there's a lot of talk about how do you look after your mental well-being as well as your physical well-being if you can't get outside as much as you perhaps have in the past. But I think that I hope that that message will kind of be there after we've come through the pandemic, and people will realize a lot more that that is so important. That it's the classic case of put on your oxygen mask first before you help other people, because if you stop breathing, you're not much good to anybody else.
Yeah, and it also has, I think, illustrated for a lot of us how if you have defined success solely on a metrics of money, for example, this situation has created a very interesting dynamic within business where it has taken the bottom out for a lot of people. And not because they did anything wrong or they weren't running their business well, or, a lot of times when our businesses aren't doing well, we can actually experience shame because we, feel like we should be at a certain place
Mm,
or have created expectations for ourselves. But right now, if you are a person who has only created a definition of success that's tied to the monetary value of your company or how much revenue your company is generating, I think people are being put in this place to really consider, does that now mean that I'm not successful? Right? Like if it can be taken away from you that easily, then that is the risk of having it be entirely defined from the outside, as opposed to, what, I'm here with my family. We're all healthy. I'm taking care of myself. I'm doing everything I can in my business to be ready for when this goes away. Therefore, I'm still successful.
mm. Yeah, and also, I mean, one of the things that I'm doing, and I see that you're doing it also, is being there for other people in the form of putting out information and sharing insights. One of the things I'm fascinated by is how people do that, though, and I like the way you do it because you're reflecting on on the pandemic situation, but at the same time you're talking about the fundamentals rather than saying, well, here's my tips for getting through this pandemic and surviving this pandemic, which I see a lot of. And I always wonder, well, when was the last time you were in a pandemic? Because I don't think anybody that is living has been through this before. And even if you take the Spanish flu pandemic back in the early 1900s as a model, first of all, none of us were around then, and secondly, is it really a model? Because I think things were a lot different then than they are now.
Yeah, and like especially again with everything that's going on right now, I think everybody's doing the best that they can with the tools that they have and the situation that they're given, and it's so different from person to person. So, as a mom with two teenagers, I could say, here's my 5 tips for, getting work done while your kids are at home. Well, for friends that I know that have a toddler and an infant,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
looks entirely different. And for somebody who's, 20 something on their own, again, it looks entirely different. So, again, for me, it goes back to that, what do you need in order to be the best version of yourself and show up in your business however you can, which again is completely different from for each of us. And that's
Mm.
where if you've never taken the time to figure out what that is, like I almost call it our minimum system requirements. Like computers have like minimum amount of RAM that they need,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
minimum, right? Well, I think that each of us have like a minimum amount of spirituality that we need, a minimum amount of physical activity we need, a minimal amount of, person to person contact that we need just to be able to be, an operating version of ourselves, which again, we don't often consider with our businesses. And then we hit a wall and we're like, how did that happen? Oh, wait, I haven't slept in 3 days.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And same with our life. Like our relationships have minimum requirements, and we have minimum requirements in our life around, community, church, if that's a big part of your life, all those things that when we give them the time and the space, they all come together and help elevate us to be better for ourselves, those three places and the world in general. But we've generally operated from a place of, I'm going to focus and grind and work on my business, and, life and self will take care of itself somehow. And then we get to that place where we're like, oh my gosh, I didn't take care of it and it didn't take care of itself.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was talking with a lady, Paris Cutler, a little while ago on the podcast, and she talked about the top of the mountain. That when you get to the top of the mountain, there was a certain emptiness for her, and I think from what she was describing, it sounds a little bit like what you're saying there. That she defined success. She wanted to be the number one in her niche and her business, and she achieved that and achieved amazing success by all kind of external measures. And when she realized I've gotten there, it was kind of a totally empty feeling because probably everything else was out of balance.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes it's even just a change in the wording. Like success ultimately is not a destination.
Hmm.
It's a way of being, it's a way of showing up, it's a way of existing, right? Like instead of saying I've achieved success, am I being successful? Am I succeeding? Right? And that's where, when you look at your family or however that looks for you, if you're being really successful and have got the seven-figure business, but you don't even know what your kid's favorite video game is, right? Are you succeeding truly?
Hmm.
Right? If you've worked yourself to the point where, you've got the Lambo and the big house, but you can't walk around the block without huffing because you've been sitting in front of a
Hmm.
computer for, so many hours a week. Again, you've got what typically was considered success. You're at the top of that mountain, which, you were likely looking at that peak. But if we're looking at it as a destination, we're missing the bigger picture.
Hmm. All right. Well, that's a good segue. I think the bigger picture, and I'd like to talk a little bit about marketing and your process to marketing. And I know that you say that your superpower is distilling high level views of the opportunities that are at hand and then kind of building an action plan around that, a strategy and action plan. So tell us a little bit more about the whole process.
Well, I it's funny because we started talking about relationships and marketing at the very beginning.
Mm,
For me, right from the very beginning, I think what's been lost in digital marketing has been the connection to people, right? We've gotten all into the funnels and how much fun we can
mm,
have with funnels. But I actually look at marketing from the point of conversation. Like on my website, I call myself the customer conversation architect because I believe that marketing can be created in a way that there's an architecture that helps support the customer journey. And I think of it more as conversations. So I look at the opportunity to create conversations at different places along the customer journey and how to use that to tie the marketing between the people we're trying to talk to, our potential clients or customers, and our business goals. So it's similar to what, the typical pieces of marketing are, but again, I try to root them in conversation that there's, the informational type of conversation which, is traditionally at the top of funnel where it's essentially saying, hi, how are you? You have this problem, let me help you with it, in less of a talking to than a talking with, and then moving that along to a bigger conversation where we're engaging back and forth. And I've had people say to me, well, conversation is two-sided and marketing is one-sided, right? That a social post
mhm,
or a blog post is one-sided. And I would challenge people on that because I know that if I were to put out a post right now that said, chocolate is evil, which is so simplistic, but if I were, it starts a conversation in someone's
mm.
head where they're like, I can't believe she said that. What kind of awful, evil person would think such a thing? Right. But it does, it starts a conversation.
Mm,
And then if you can align the rest of the marketing to help shape and carry that conversation forward into a conversion of some sort of sale, then it's a much more natural progression than, you know, trying to time ads in front of people because they've already been there. And that's an opportunity that can be used if it's used in that way. If it's like, okay, I know they've been to the website, so I've kind of had this piece of the conversation, so we can continue it here, as opposed to just like, here's my opportunity to slap another ad in front of them, if
mm.
that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Totally. And I think there's a whole bunch of things in that. I mean, I like to say that marketing is simply having a conversation with somebody who could be an ideal client. And it's very consistent with what you're saying. And the other thing I really like is that you focusing on the customer journey. So marketing is actually part of the entire customer journey. So and there should be a conversation happening at all those touch points. So I think the classic for me, and coming back to that idea of automation and retargeting, is people use those tools, but use them very lazily, I call it. So, for example, and what was it this morning? I got one which is, here's 50% off this software, and it's photographic software. I'm a keen photographer. Clearly, they're retargeting me from something. Now, the key though is that I already have purchased that software. In fact, I've been a customer of theirs for about 5 or 6 years, and I've got the latest piece of the latest version of that software. So, they're treating me as if I'm not a customer, which is very impersonal, and it's obviously just a straight automation. If they were smart about it, they would use that automation to figure out that, hey, I'm a customer. Here's where I'm at in my journey because I have that software. I've been a customer of theirs for 5 years. And so what is my experience likely to be? It's not likely to be, how can I buy that software again? It's likely to be more along the lines of, you know, I've been using that software for 5 years. How can I become even better at using that software? Or what are some of the hidden things in that software that I may not have discovered? So they're more likely the things that would interest me. And if they use their retargeting to say, well, what kind of things can we help that person with on their part of the journey versus what kind of things can we help the person who's just trialing the software with, on their journey, because they're at different places.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And like at the end of the journey is
Mm,
the nurturing, right? Which is so often forgotten, and there's so few companies that do it well, and I'll never understand that because there's all the stats around, it's much easier to get somebody who's already done business with you to do it again. But people love to use the dating analogy, but what I see all the time is, you wine them and dine them to get them to be customers. And then once they're customers and they're like
mm.
happy to be engaged with you, you're like, well, just hold on, honey. And you're like off starting to
Chasing
talk to
the
the
next
next
year.
person, right? Which leaves
Yeah,
them vulnerable for someone else to come and say, hey, I see you sitting here by yourself. And,
yeah.
would you mind if I join you? They're going to be like, okay, sure, that would be great, right? You've left yourself open. When you've just spent all this time getting them to the point that they're willing to sit at the table with you, which
Mm,
again, the same as you, it completely boggles my mind. It does take a more sophisticated investment in getting to know your clients to understand what they need from you beyond the initial engagement. And like there's people, that you had an interview with Summer, who's an email strategist.
mm,
And, her and I've had conversations around how there's huge opportunity in email marketing for companies to take that nurture section and really cement it, like really establish that relationship with them beyond just a product, right? Like that's where the opportunity exists for brands, right? Like I was doing some research on Gatorade recently, and you know, their brand loyalty is so deep that they barely need to spend money on marketing the way other
yeah.
companies do because people are just so in love with the brand. They're so loyal to it. And if we can create that even on a smaller scale for businesses, there's huge opportunity there.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that, again, it comes back to what I was saying earlier. The marketing isn't done when you've made the sale because there's that onboarding, and how do you then help people along the next part of their journey because they're still on that journey. So it's kind of had occurred to me. It's like the dating analogy. If you've been giving a partner a bunch of flowers every day, you've got them to the point that they agree to marry you or become engaged, whatever it might be, and then you're off to the next partner, and you're giving them two bunches of flowers every day because this is what I see a lot online where a business will say, for new customers only, we're going to have 50% off for the next 12 months. And then if I, as an existing customer, come back and say, well, I'd like to have that offer too because I'm paying the 100% price right now. Oh no, it's only for new customers.
Yes,
I think
and
what
I
what a
call
what a great way to lose customers.
yeah, and those are I call them the customer journey potholes and pitfalls, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you're walking along on the journey with the company feeling really good about it, and then just all of a sudden, there's a huge pothole or a pit, and you're like, "How did I end up in here? I thought we were walking along nicely together."
Mm,
But right, like, and again, it's because it can be tied back a lot of times to the Mod Podge that, like, in larger corporations, you've got multiple departments that are functioning without, like, looking at what kind of conversation are we creating? Is it cohesive? Is there places that we're not only dropping the ball, we're basically bouncing it off their forehead, right?
mm,
Like, because we do live in a time where there is just so much choice for customers that if you are not taking care of them, the reality is that someone else will. And there's new players coming online all the time. And if they're smart enough to really, create that engaging brand that makes people feel like they're part of something bigger, there's a little company called Apple who did that pretty good,
mm.
right? It can become a true disruption, not a disruption as in the, talking over each other and trying to be disruptive, but just something that really shakes up the status quo.
Mm. All right. Now, you mentioned earlier about the blog post you're writing today. I noticed you're pretty regular on your writing. So talk to us a little bit about how you go about the regular writing and why that's important.
Well, it's funny that you should say that because I've actually not been very regular. I've been very
Okay.
good at keeping other people regular. Um, and the main thing for me has actually been the pandemic that happened, where now that it's started, I'm like, there needs to be more voices that have something to say beyond, like you were saying, here's 10 tips for working from home with which,
Mm,
not that there's no value in that, there is, but I have been very mindful about not creating content just for the sake of creating content. And the current environment just really spurred me forward to finally commit to creating my own content. So again, success on purpose. It's, what is my purpose? And I finally have it for my content. I finally feel like I understand what I can say that could be of value, that could make a difference, and that keeping it all in my head doesn't serve anybody.
mm. I think that is a really important point. I mean, there's a lot of people that I encourage to write content or do podcasts or publish videos, and they say, "Oh, I don't like talking, or I don't like the sound of my voice, or I don't like see myself on video, or I'm not a good writer." And it's that sentence that you just said there that keeping it in my head doesn't serve anyone, and everybody's got a unique perspective. They've got expertise and experiences and life experiences right through that I think are really valuable to share with the right audience, of course.
Yeah. And then the next step beyond that is I've actually done again what I've done with a lot of clients, which is chunk things down to the smallest piece to make sure that I'm being successful when I'm trying to get it done. So a lot of times we have, again, the lofty goal of I'm going to do this once a week or whatever, but we never break it down into the individual pieces that need to be done in order to be successful in that. And again, no one's going to say I'm going to run a marathon and just expect to be able to like show up and run it. It's the time spent training, thinking, planning, and doing all that stuff that leads to those successful outcomes.
Hmm. So yeah, the marathon's an interesting analogy, and I was reflecting on that a little while ago when I was thinking about doing this massive bike ride that would challenge me quite severely, and it's 250 kilometers with I don't know how many kilometers of climbing, so it's in the mountains, and there's a time limit as well to finish, partly because, of course, they don't want you riding in the dark. And I thought, well, Well, there are a couple of things that happened there, but one of the things that came to me when you were talking about the marathon is if you think about that event or a marathon, and it's kind of overwhelming. But if you break it down and say, well, let me go out for a 5K run or a 50K bike ride, and now let me do that again. And now let me do it 5 times a week and with a couple of nice rest days in between. And now let me ramp that distance up a little bit more. Then all of a sudden you think, oh, running that distance or cycling that distance actually isn't such a big deal. So, yeah, it's a really good way to look at it.
Yeah, and if we circle back, because I love loops, to the idea of success too, like that goes back to what we were talking about, where when you look at something like that, if you create the destination of, finishing within a certain time in a certain way as success, then you miss the whole success of the experience. Whereas if getting there, sitting on the bike and pedaling in the race makes it a success for you, then you're rooting your success in the experience and you showing up as opposed to, the outcome, which so much of
Mm.
it is out of our control anyways.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on that. And we've been looking a lot at our action plans and making those more outcome focused rather than say, well, right, what's a good example? Publish. Well, that's not the right way. We used to do it that way anyway, but record a podcast, or there'd be an action. Whereas the outcome focused one would be the podcast episode is recorded for this week. And then we can tick that off and say, well, yes, we've achieved that. It's a lot clearer. So what's your understanding of that? Because I know, or your view on that, because I know that you recently published an interesting article on goal setting and how to make sure that you actually can enjoy that journey and you maximize your chances of achieving those goals.
Yeah, well, I think it's a lot of it is, being very realistic about the goal that we're setting. And especially in business, especially with new entrepreneurs, as soon as someone says set a goal, it's generally, how much money are you going to make? What are you going to make it by? Without really taking it apart into, like you're saying, those individual pieces. Like in the beginning, if you were going to do that bike race and you had never been on a bike, just getting on the bike needs to be the first, achievable little piece, the little goal going to an outcome. And again, that outcome needs to be realistic, right? Like if someone's decided that they're going to start swimming and they need to have an Olympic time, well, I'm sorry, that's not going to even Michael Phelps, right? The first time he went swimming, he did not get an Olympic record. Right? That has been, again, breaking things down, reducing them to their pieces, and being able to, like you're saying, there's things that you can control. Like you can say, we are going to have one podcast done a week. You've broken that down individual steps. It's achievable. Whereas if you were to say, we're going to have 10,000 downloads on our podcast this week, depending on what your previous numbers have been, if you've just arbitrarily picked that number because you've heard that's a good number, there's just way too many things within that are out of your control. That wouldn't be fair to put on your team.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just really understanding the difference between an outcome and which outcomes you can control, right? Like, and which ones you can't, and then breaking it down into the individual pieces that are going to get you closer to the outcome that you're looking to achieve.
That's great. Okay, well, we've talked about marketing being a conversation with people, and I know you're very strong about creating those conversations online. So how do you go about starting those conversations? What are some of the really ninja tricks, if you like, of getting those conversations started? I mean, short of saying that chocolate is bad for you on social media, which
Yeah,
I'm sure would start a conversation.
that's right. Aside from being controversial.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's back to what you said at the very beginning. It's getting back to the humanity. And I'm not really sure how or why it all started, where marketing has been so much of a something that's done to customers as opposed to conversation that's done with people, but it's really figuring out what people are looking for in terms of your solution. What are the conversations that they're already having in their head, and how you can join that conversation and become part of that dialogue and move them towards the solution that's with you, and not in a, manipulative way, but in a genuine way that's done with value and service, right? Like, it's back to the Lamborghini person, I guess, in some ways. If your goal is purely just to make money, then, likely the idea of taking the time to get to know your customer and care about them may not be of interest. But if you're looking for that more holistic way of, having a company with core values that exist within your company, your culture, your marketing, the experience that you're creating with your customers, then it's worth the time to figure out, where are they? What are they looking for? How can we be part of that conversation? So figuring out where they play, where they live, where they ask for questions, which again goes back to the Mod Podge. If you've just been constantly sticking things together without taking the time to figure out, where are they already walking, where you could walk up beside them and be like, hey, I see that you're, looking for this thing. Do you mind if I join you? Let's chat about it, right? And then like carrying it through with the marketing in a logical way, which right now there's so much opportunity because we do have all these pieces that will play together. So you can start a conversation somewhere on social, get them on your email list and nurture them and take them through right to a purchase at some point through a landing page or in person or whatever it is for your business. It doesn't matter. Um, it's just more about doing it in a cohesive way where everything works together, where we're not jarring people, where, we show up in one place one way and then we're completely
Mm.
different in email, and then they get to the landing page and they're like, really, is this the same person? This isn't the sense that I was getting of them or what they offer, and now it's completely different. Or like you were saying with the flowers, where I felt like I knew you and now I've given you my money and I'm just not sure I matter.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
So I can't, there's no way to hack human
Yeah.
relationships, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? It all comes back to the relationship thing, and I guess we all have the ability to build relationships with people. I mean, some of us are probably more empathetic than others, I would say, and I won't go down that path any further than that. But we can all take on board the idea that it's about starting relationships, starting conversations, and then really working with people.
Yeah, exactly. And it applies everywhere. Like even if you're using SEO to pull in traffic, whatever
Mm.
keywords that you're using, whatever opportunity you're using, there's a conversation that's going on within that person that they're looking for something. So if you show up for them and they click through to you, then it's making sure that you're, again, joining that conversation and bringing them through. So if it's, around a pain point, you're helping them see that there is a solution for it, and just planting the seed of that conversation that potentially you or your company, right, can help them solve that problem. And we know that it's very rare that, there's love at first sight, even in marketing. Right? Like, sure, it happens every once in a while. Someone sees an ad and they're like, yep, that's the thing. They buy, they're your super fan. Like, there are unicorns out there. But for the most part, there is a there is that journey. There is that, you know, building of a relationship, the know, like, and trust, which we like is touted all over the place, but isn't always actually done.
Mm. Yeah. And it comes back to people doing business with people. And yeah.
Or brands, like most brands nowadays are seen as having a personality, which is why, conversational and personality driven copy is so huge right now, because people do want communication from even brands that sounds like a person. Like when even the devices in your home are talking to you like a person. Hi, Alexa, right? They're expecting more from companies and corporations in those communications.
Yeah. 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 Well, that's right. And they're eavesdropping as well, which is the scary part. All right. Well, this has been absolutely fascinating, Mariana. I could go on talking marketing and customer journeys and customer relationships for ages, but I'm aware of the time. So I think it's a good point to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round. And it's designed to help our listener to get some tips from your experience. So I've got 5 questions, and hopefully you'll give us some really snappy, insightful answers that'll have our listener go and do something awesome today as a result. So, what's the number one thing you think anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
To trust themselves and the value of their ideas and what they have to offer.
Mhm. Do you have any tips on how to do that when people are doubting themselves?
It's that introspection, being able to identify when, imposter syndrome gets thrown around a lot, but putting anything new out into the world, which is a big part of innovation, whether it's thought leadership, whether it's a product, whether it's a service, or anything else, and just being able to check in with yourself on whether it's fear that's holding you back or whether it's actually a missing piece. Because there are times when we have something amazing that we could put forth in the world and we do know that we're missing something. That's when you need maybe some external validation or some help or some support. But a lot of times I've seen people that keep things to themselves and keep them small because they're not able to just take a leap with the value that they have to bring. And we all stumble along the way, giving
Mm.
ourselves permission to do that. But you can't optimize, you can't, create a second iteration of something that doesn't have a first one. So
Yeah.
just believe that what you have to offer has potential and start there.
Mm. Yeah, great. I love the kind of a second iteration if there's not a first one. Mm. All right. What's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
Sticky notes. Post-it notes, having some way to capture those ideas that come around generally at the less convenient time as possible,
Mm.
and being able to capture them and then give yourself time and space to go through it. I used to be an idea hoarder where I would just have like just these collections of things that would come to me that I never did anything with. So I actually have time now on my calendar, either on Sundays or if I've booked Sunday off as a total family day, Monday mornings, where I actually go through whatever has come up for me the week before. So instead of it constantly being an idea bank that I'm never cashing in, I make a point of pulling out the ones that look like they have the best investment potential and giving them a little bit of attention.
Mm. Making the occasional withdrawal and spending it in some way. Yeah, great. I
Exactly.
love it. Mm. All right. Now, what's a favorite resource of yours that you use a lot?
Evernote. I use
Mhm.
it for capturing all those ideas when I don't have sticky notes on hand, because it would be strange to have sticky notes with me everywhere.
Yeah.
And I've just recently discovered that my Apple Watch is waterproof. So I keep it on when I'm doing dishes, when I'm out in the rain, even when I'm showering, so that when I have those strokes of genius, I can leave myself voice notes and catch it
Okay.
all in Evernote.
Straight into Evernote from your Apple Watch.
Yes, because inspiration has a sense of humor. So it'll be when like your hands are full,
Mm.
often when we're in the shower, and it's hard to write with pen and paper. So that way you can capture those strokes of genius when they come to you.
Mhm. Yeah, I get them on the bike when I'm riding on my own, which I'm doing a lot now, of course, with the social distancing rules.
And
And
training.
yeah, and what happens then, of course, is sometimes I get 4 or 5 ideas on a 2-hour bike ride, and then I'm trying to remember them all because I don't want to stop to write anything down or record it on my phone. So I'm trying to remember them all by the time I get back home.
So you need to have the app open so you can just tap it while
Yeah,
while
yeah, yeah.
you talk.
Yeah, I actually take my, I've got a Garmin watch. I actually take that off when I'm riding because I've got the cycling computer running, and otherwise I get duplicate recordings. And I don't need the heart rate guide either because I've got a heart rate monitor on. So maybe I need
Yeah,
to wear it again to do those recordings.
unless you have your notifications on it, because if it's binging and buzzing with all your emails and everything, that'll
No,
take you
no,
away
I
from the ride.
notifications. I generally have notifications off other than phone calls. Everything else is pretty well off. Okay, now what's the best way to keep a project on track?
I like to use reduction to ridiculous, which is just breaking everything down into its smallest bite-sized piece. That's another post I'm working on.
Mm,
But it's often what I use with people because I'll challenge them with, what is the one thing that you're going to work on this week? And usually it's something large, like I'm going to write my website copy.
mm,
Okay, let's take it down a notch. So, like, what's one piece of that? I'm going to write my homepage. Okay, now what's one piece of that?
mm.
Like, do you have an outline for it? No. Okay, you're going to need an outline. So, let's start with the outline, right? Like breaking it down. And even if the outline seems like it's too big, then going to, what's the about section for the homepage that you can do? Or like, really breaking it down because we all do better when we can gain some momentum, but a lot of times we'll start with, again, if we go back to your bike analogy, that
Yeah, yeah.
instead of saying, I'm going to start with getting on the bike and just seeing how far I can go before I peter out, like let's just
Mm,
figure out what my base level is. It's like I'm going to start with a 25K ride.
mm.
Okay. Right? And then when you don't achieve that, or when you're tired for 5 days afterwards because you're burnt out, you're not going to be successful. So just, breaking it down to those individual pieces so you know what they are, reducing them down to the most ridiculous piece that there's no way, like if you can get as close to something that's so small there's no way you can't achieve it,
Mm.
then you know what the next one is, so that as soon as you finish that and you feel good about it, you've got the next one done, so you can get more momentum and more done than having these, big large chunks.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That are overwhelming. Yeah, that's really great advice, and it reminded me. I mean, this is a bike analogy as well, but a couple of times over the last week, I've got up in the morning and I've thought, oh, I feel a bit tired. And I'm thinking doing a 1 to 2 hour bike ride. No, I don't really feel like it. And then I say to myself, just get on the bike, just get dressed, go downstairs, take the bike outside out of the garage and just get on it. And that's all. And then I can be happy. And, as it turned out, I did do 2 hour bike rides on those couple of days. But it's very much that philosophy of, well, what's the minimum thing I need to do? That at least even if I've just gone up and down the road, I come back, I say, well, I achieved that. So I feel good about myself for the rest of the day. But as it was, and as you suggested, I got the momentum to keep going.
Well, and it's so funny. A lot of times, if we can just get started, we forget that we had resistance to starting in the beginning. Like
Yeah.
I've had clients that struggle with writing, and I've said, you know what, just commit to sitting, like getting in the seat, sitting in front of the computer. And even if you don't know what to write, just write about not knowing what to write about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, just actually writing, I don't know what to write about. I don't know what I'm sitting here. This is so ridiculous. And then usually something will start and
Mm.
they can get their content or whatever done. I think I've only ever had once where the person was like, I literally wrote 30 minutes of what I didn't know what to write about. Hey, but you wrote, so you're
Yeah, yeah.
winning.
Yeah, yeah, it's good achievement. 30 minutes of writing, that's a long time.
Writing about not having anything to write about, like that's
Mm,
it's dedication.
mm. All right, now what's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
Be yourself. I think a lot of times imposter syndrome comes from, like, in some ways being an imposter, feeling like we need to be or do something other than what comes natural to us. And again, we see this in business all the time that, am I successful if I'm not running a 7-figure business or a 6-figure business or whatever figure of the day
Mm,
feels important to you? And, is that you? Like, sure, there's so many different things you can do. You can run a business in so many different ways, especially now with all the digital options, but you differentiate yourself by doing what you do better than anybody else can. Getting there does take some time, and is a trial and error. So giving yourself grace along the way is really important. And then, taking note of the places where you really do seem to shine, where you get a result for somebody, where you get that feedback where someone has said, you've really helped me, even if it's in a way that you didn't expect it to be, and looking for those signposts when you're on your own path and then really leaning into it. And it is a journey. Like life is a journey, business is a journey, entrepreneurship is a journey, and not being rigid, staying in your lane, but being open to, exit signs that come along the way that could take you somewhere better.
Yeah. Yeah, so awareness is a really important part of that as well. And listening.
Yeah, and staying in your own lane. Because again, there's, like you said, so many shiny objects all the time, and so much posturing that goes on online and in business in general, that it's important to just, what's the game that you're playing and how are you doing at that game?
All right. Well, thanks, Mariana. This has been really fabulous. Now, where can people find out more about you and maybe even reach out and say thank you for what you've shared with us today?
Well, generally the best place to get me is at The Purposeful Entrepreneur, and hello@thepurposefulentrepreneur.com. Send me a note. If I can help you in any way, I will do my best to do that.
All right. That's great. We'll include those links in the show notes today. Now, what piece of parting advice would you like to leave our listener today?
Oh, I guess, I don't know when this will air. I guess regardless of what's going on in the world, giving yourself the space and the grace to just show up as the best version of yourself that you can in all the areas of your life, for yourself, for your relationships, and for your business. And yeah. And that's enough.
That's great. Yeah. Show up the best you can in all those areas. Wonderful.
And that's different from day to day. And just a little bit of grace.
It is. That's right. Yeah. That was one of the things that I discovered a while ago, actually, probably last year. At some point, I wrote something in, I'm not sure I wrote this in an article or I'll have to go and find it, but it was about showing up your best. But, your best today is not necessarily the same as your best tomorrow. It may be more or less. And that's okay.
Yeah. And in different seasons of our life, I wrote a post somewhere about capacity recently, and that it's important to check in with yourself on what your current capacity is. And again, right now when we're talking, we're in the middle of the pandemic, and just appreciating that, your for right now capacity may be different than your usual capacity or your future capacity. And again, that giving yourself some grace and adjusting where you need to, so that you can, again, be that best version in all the places that you need to be.
Fantastic. All right. Finally then, Mariana, who would you like me to chat with on a future InnovaBuzz podcast, and why?
Oh, I would recommend Janice Tomich. She is a speaking strategist and coach, and helps people who want to make a bigger impact with their message, get that out in the world, and create a difference.
Great. Well, we'll get an introduction to Janice from you and speak to her and get her on the podcast as well. Fantastic.
Wonderful.
Well, thanks so much for sharing your insights and your time with us so generously today on the InnovaBuzz podcast, Mariana. I've really enjoyed this. There's been a lot of gold nuggets there. I love all the stories, and I wish you all the best for the future, and let's keep in touch.
Oh, absolutely. And thanks so much for having me. It was wonderful.
I hope you enjoyed that wonderfully engaging conversation with Mariana and took something away from her episode. There were so many wonderful analogies that she shared with us to explain some marketing concepts. I really enjoyed all those. I'd love to know what you took away from Mariana's episode. Leave a comment below the blog post, which you can find at innovabiz.co/Mariana Norton. That is MarianaNorton. All lowercase, all one word, innovabiz.co/Mariana Norton. You'll also find links to her Purposeful Entrepreneur website, her social media pages, and further contact information for getting in touch with Mariana there. Mariana suggested we have a conversation with Janice Tomich, speaker coach, on a future InnovaBuzz podcast episode. So Janice, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast courtesy of Mariana Norton. Tune in again to the next episodes of the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we've got some more fantastic guests lined up, including Will Reed of Samurai Walk and marketing coach Charlie Wyman. Thanks for listening to this episode. Make sure you subscribe to the show to be reminded of new episodes. It's free to subscribe. Leave a review if you like. Even if you don't like me, I'm okay with that. I'm asking you to leave a review because it helps other people find this show. Go to innovabiz.co to join our marketing transformation community and access a free gift my team and I made for you. It's the Marketing Master Mini Class. We want to give you everything you need to transform your marketing into a human-centered, relationship-focused growth engine. Until next time, I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBiz. Remember, be awesome and keep innovating.